There has to be some reporting in every review. I mean, first of all, you have to play fair with your reader. Here's what I think a movie review should do. The first thing it should do, it should give some notion to the reader of what the movie is about and what it is like. If you play fair with your reader, you can give a movie a bad review and they'll still be able to read that review and know that they would like to go see that movie. You shouldn't just, blast it in such a way that the reader would think no reasonable person would ever want to go to this film. You have to give the movie its day in court, too. There has to be something in there that conveys what the experience is like.
So not too long ago, I released a video where I discussed some of my biggest problems with internet movie critics. This video isn't going to be like that video. This video is for the most part unscripted, and there won't be any fancy editing in the video either, since I wanted to just have a much more relaxed discussion about the topic. I also just really wanted to test this new Sony F3 that I'm filming this on, as well as the new Rode NTG4 that's recording all the audio. First of all, I'd like to explain my last video and answer some of the questions about why I included certain movie critics and then excluded certain others. Originally, I wanted to do the video without name-dropping anyone at all because, generally speaking, I feel like videos where you discuss other YouTubers and content creators by critiquing them and calling them out by name is generally really sensationalist, and there's not really any right way to do it without coming off as if you're looking for attention. But I eventually realized that if I didn't specifically state who the people that were suffering from the problems that I talked about actually were, I would probably just confuse a lot of people, and I'd get a lot of comments asking me if I was talking about X movie reviewer or Y movie reviewer. So I just ultimately decided that it would be best to just come right out and speak my mind. Unfortunately, though, I still got a lot of comments from people asking me what my opinions on certain critics that I didn't include in the video are, and for the most part, the critics that I didn't include in the video fall into two main categories. There's the people that I wanted to discuss more thoroughly than I could have realistically done in this video, in which case those critics will get their own individual video somewhere along the line, and then there's the people that I just really didn't have that much to say about. The most popular person in this category would be I Hate Everything, who I originally wanted to include in the video, but after going back and watching a lot of his content, I found that the overwhelming majority of it is pretty much just boring, because he tends to only go after low-hanging fruit by only reviewing movies that already have overwhelmingly negative reviews on places like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. And personally, I just don't see what's so entertaining about shitting all over a movie that hundreds of people have already shit on before you did. But with that out of the way, I wanted to talk more about what I think is the biggest problem with movie critics here on YouTube. After a long year of shitting on movies and shitting on the people that make those movies, cynical movie critics all over YouTube will make a video about their favorite films of the year. Some may even go as far to make a video about their favorite films of all time. And while there are subtle differences between everyone's list, a lot of the times you see the same 5 movies on there. And they're usually the films that everyone already praised endlessly at the Academy Awards earlier in the year. The Wolf of Wall Street, The Revenant, Room, Boyhood, Moonlight, all of these made a lot of people's top 10 lists at the end of the year. And while these movies are good, and yes, they may be some of the best films that came out that year, if the title of your video is My Favorite Films of 2019, are you really sharing your favorite movies or just the ones that were good? There's often a lot of really good movies that come out throughout the year that just don't make it to the level of Oscar-worthy, and I never see any internet movie critics even so much as mention a lot of them. And I guess you could make the argument that a lot of movie critics may not have seen these movies or just don't have the same taste as me, but in a sea of internet movie critics, you would think that there would be at least one popular film critic that would have something to say about any of these movies, good, bad, or indifferent. But sadly, a lot of movies just fly under these people's radars because they're just not the movies that everyone's talking about. And whenever film critics do make a video talking about underrated movies, it's always the same movies over and over again. Drive, Nightcrawler, Synecdoche, New York. And while all of these are great movies, if everyone's calling them underrated, are they really underrated? Sure, Martin Scorsese is an amazing director, but how come whenever he comes out with a new movie, it's always in everybody's end of the year lists? Same thing with Wes Anderson or Quentin Tarantino. Yes, Wolf of Wall Street was an amazing film, but I don't think it was anywhere close to being one of my favorite films of that year. mostly because I have really oddball tastes. And I feel like if more film critics on YouTube were being genuine rather than just agreeing with the majority opinion, I feel like you would see more of their oddball tastes shine through in their reviews rather than just hearing them regurgitate the same shit over and over again. Now, while it may seem like I'm being harsh here, I don't feel like a lot of movie critics do this for the sake of fitting in. I think it's mostly done because people like Scorsese and Tarantino have been in the industry for over 20 years. I mean, that's longer than a lot of these movie critics have been alive. And Scorsese and Tarantino have very unique styles that have had a lot of impact on filmmaking as a whole, and a lot of new directors take a lot of inspiration from them, so much so that techniques that were once seen as unique to these directors are now the industry standards when it comes to making movies. What I believe happened is that a lot of these film critics grew up watching movies by Scorsese, or Tarantino, or Spielberg, or Wes Anderson, and so as they got older, the things that they look for in movies are things that remind them of those directors, which just so happen to be the things that are included in a lot of Academy Award-winning movies, because a lot of the people in the Academy grew up with those films as well, and a lot of the filmmakers that make those movies were inspired by the people that worked on those classic films as well, whether it be in the storytelling, in the visual style, or even in the casting choices. And while you may not notice these things while you're watching the movie,
your brain certainly does.
And the reason why you see a lot of the same types of movies getting all the praise from critics is because a lot of critics just haven't evolved past their love for the filmmaking standards that they grew up with. And that's their thing to come to terms with, and I have no say in that because I already broadened my taste just by going to lots of different film festivals. But ultimately, what I fear is that as time goes on and the market becomes more saturated and we have more different types of movies coming out, that these old qualities sticking around in the public's eye will eventually cloud out the ability for new things to come to the forefront and set a new standard of filmmaking genius. I'll use Suicide Squad as an example for the millionth time until people start appreciating the movie as much as I do. While I acknowledge that Suicide Squad is not a great film by any stretch of the imagination, Suicide Squad was probably one of my favorite films of 2016 just because it was a breath of fresh air from the absolutely done-to-death Marvel formula. Now let's imagine for a second that Suicide Squad came out long before the MCU was introduced. It's hard to imagine that people wouldn't respect the film at least a little bit more, since I feel like a lot of the negative backlash that film receives comes from people's insistence on comparing it to the MCU. On an even playing field, where being like Marvel, or being like Scorsese, or being like Spielberg wasn't the golden standard for what was considered a good movie, could Suicide Squad have been to DC what Avengers was to Marvel? I feel like there's this guideline that is encouraged by films that are considered to be great, and that iterating on them is such a surefire way of creating the next great film that we don't then go out and try to create something totally different that could very well set the new golden standard for filmmaking, because it's proven that critics just won't respond to it as well. A lot of movie critics, especially the ones here on YouTube, will outline certain elements of a movie that they really like, such as good story, good characters, and scenes that convey strong emotion, and then say that these elements are what makes a movie good, as in all good movies have these elements. Now, going back to Suicide Squad again, I can understand why some people don't like Suicide Squad, but what I can't understand is when people try to say that Suicide Squad is bad because it doesn't have these elements, because it doesn't have the elements that a good movie is supposed to have. Now, if your argument was that you felt like Suicide Squad needed these elements and didn't have them, that's perfectly fine. But to say that any film that doesn't have these elements is automatically a bad movie is a bit strange, considering all the different ways that a movie can be good. As soon as you start prescribing elements to a film and saying that this is what it takes for a movie to be good, proximity to films that were praised in the years before, then you're going to start to see the industry become very sloppy and samey. And if you are saying that all of these elements need to be included in order for a film to suit your tastes, then you have to acknowledge that your tastes are ultimately bad for the industry. If too many people are unwilling to expand their tastes, then we're never going to see evolution in this industry. If you try to hold every film to its proximity to another film that you love, then nothing new is ever going to get through to you. And the more that people do this, the more that people like me, who like to make and watch really bizarre content, start to suffer. The fact that most movie critics aren't doing this, aren't expanding their tastes, shows how little they actually care about advancing the medium. Just like how their ignorance in the filmmaking process and their refusal to inform themselves on how that process works shows how little they care about actually advancing the industry rather than just making fun of it for the sake of entertainment. If enough movies aren't being released that are to your taste, then all you're gonna do is talk about how lame it is that most movies don't suit your taste. God forbid you go out and actually make your own movie and work towards improving the medium. Oh yeah, fuck being the change that you want to see in the industry. And while you're at it, fuck expanding your taste so that way you're actually able to appreciate more movies than what you're used to. While I understand where this mentality comes from, I feel like more people should acknowledge that the barrier of taste is a lot more difficult to get around than some would like to admit, and that a movie shouldn't be considered bad just because it doesn't have the same elements as a film that suits the tastes of the general public. The message that I want you to take from this video is to go out and try to expand your taste. Try to appreciate more movies than what you currently do. And if you're just someone that's not interested in doing that, then just don't talk about movies on the internet. Because if you do, I'll make fun of you. I'll make fun of you and your shitty taste. Just watch me.